Hello and welcome. So we got a special guest today, my friend '06. We grew up together in primary school, or prior to that, really. I think the last year we were together was like grade one. So very, very early, very early in schooling. And so let me just bring him on. How you doing, '06?
Hey, doing all right. I'm looking a little blurry compared to you, but I'll make do, I suppose. Don't
Yeah,
know if
I,
any.
I went through a whole bunch of different webcams to try find which ones work very well and which ones don't work very well. And ultimately, like the Razer Kaio Pro is the best webcam. Not the easiest to work with, but solid. I mean, you do a lot of on camera stuff during COVID too, I imagine.
Well, not so much anymore. I use this mic quite a bit for some crisp communication for my online gaming, but and I used to use this to do some teaching. I was teaching online during COVID, but I don't really use the webcam pretty much for anything anymore. Just sort of sits here in this back dark office of my house.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never regretted getting a proper mic, so we've got excellent audio here today. So I asked you to come online because of I'm sort of reinvestigating, collecting, and you're one of the earliest collectors I know of. And I'm not sure if it's only just one thing, Magic the Gathering. You're into games, but I'm not sure if you would classify games as collecting. But I just wanted to go through one news item that happened this week with Magic the Gathering. It's not really anything to do with collecting unless you think getting unlimited cards is collecting. So with Magic the Gathering Arena, so it's one of their online Magic the Gathering properties. You can get your virtual cards and play. You can play against people in that too, can't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can get cards in that and play. But one of this engineer sort of inspected the executable. It's in C sharp. He could debug it, and he found that when you go to purchase a card, it has to make server calls to say, okay, we're gonna purchase a card. But it transmitted both the quantity, the price of the card, or the set. I think it was actually more akin to like booster packs or something, and you would also do the final price. And he tried playing around with the prices and stuff, and he couldn't get that to work. As in, even though he would say, let's do 1 billion cards for 1 cent, it wouldn't respect it. So it wouldn't work. But what he was able to do was a good old fashioned integer overflow. And for some background, do you know the exploit in Civilization where Gandhi, was it Mahatma Gandhi? I think it is. He goes completely nuclear.
I've never heard of this. No.
You've never played Civ?
No, I've got them all because I'm subscribed to Humble Bundles. They just get dumped in my Steam account, but I don't actually play the damn things. It's just part of the collection, right?
Oh, okay. Well, you probably had God mode turned on while
Yes.
playing a God game. So, uh, so in that game, Gandhi's aggression level would be like zero. You know, he'd be a pacifist basically. Okay, that's cool. But there would be a power up towards the end game that reduces your opponent's aggression levels to like it reduces it by like -1 or -2. And so what would happen is if you got this power up and you reduce your opponent's aggression levels, but since Gandhi started on zero, actually he started on one, I think, it'd reduce it to zero and then -1, which isn't represented properly in the computer. So on a scale of 0 to 10 in the game of aggression, like how much war do they want, Gandhi would then go to level 255 and immediately send all of his GDP towards researching nuclear weapons and trying to kill everything on the planet.
Uh huh.
So it's a classic integer overflow. We played with hex editors as a kid with TIE Fighter. And so this person decided to, what happens if I just buy a lot of cards? And he gets to the point where it's like 2 billion something, and he goes 2 billion and something plus one, and then it effectively goes negative. And so he was able to get the price of the cards to be a negative number because the quantity of cards was just so high. And he created it, so he buys it, and then he gets basically a million boosters for 25 cents. And then he just starts opening them. And then as soon as you get duplicates in the game, more than 4 duplicates, it resulted in him getting just unlimited gems. So just unlimited money for 25 cents.
This isn't
How,
really unlimited money, though, in the sense that it's money you spend in game. So
right.
if you're not
But
interested in playing one
PvP wise,
online,
that's not very cool though.
and the money can be spent on basically buying cards, which he's
Right.
already got all of them,
He's got all of
or
them.
or playing in their tournaments, where the prizes are, when you rank high enough in their tournaments, you get cards. He's got all the cards. So fun experiment, but yeah.
Well, does he win the game?
No,
He's
because
not broken the meta.
no. The way it works is that the top tier decks that win all these matches are ones that conform to various like card lists, deck lists rather. So all the top tier decks have like 4 of a kind of one particular card. They've got like the perfect balance, and you can achieve that without buying all the cards in the game. You're just going to buy the key cards.
Right.
I haven't played this game for a very, very long time, and I could pretty easily just jump online and get like the strongest deck in the meta at the moment.
You just look it up basically.
You do, and you can't buy cards individually. You buy like booster packs, and you just crack them. You open them up, and when you open up duplicates, at least the way it used to work when I used to play it was that it wouldn't give you gems so much as it would give you wild cards, which you could then take to the shop and use those to unlock any card you wanted. So
that reduces the RNG a fair bit.
Well, it does. So the wild cards, any player who's playing fair bit is just using those to get any deck they want. Yeah, so interesting stuff. But I feel like this guy who's got all these cards unlocked is going to make the best possible decks. He's just condemning himself to a jail sentence of having to play this game. So, wow.
Well, this is mostly an engineering blog. I'm not sure if he really had any interest in playing the game, just showing what he could do to break it.
Right.
But I thought it was interesting and relevant. So, going back in time, how did you get into Magic the Gathering?
You know how I got into Magic the Gathering. I got into Magic the Gathering through you. So this is a game for anyone who's watching, any of the 2 people who are watching who don't know what this game is. You might have heard of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like that. It's like a collectible trading card game, and it's been around for a very long time. In fact, you could call it the first one. And it was originally designed as a game that was supposed to be played by fantasy nerds between rounds of Dungeons and Dragons or lull periods or whatever. And
like a D&D alternative.
Well, yeah, sort of. Not to take the place of it, because they're quite different, but to sort of, I don't know, maybe satisfy the same sort of people, satisfy their the similar interests. And since then, you could even argue that the Pokemon trading card game and Yu-Gi-Oh! It's all sort of mirrored or attempted to mirror the success of Magic the Gathering. So it came out in the early 90s, and I first got into it also in the early 90s, probably closer to the mid-90s, early mid, because I'd heard about it through you. And we were at different schools at the time. We started in the same primary school, but we ended up in different secondary schools. And so picked up some cards, picked up an Ice Age booster box, and they don't do booster. No, it was a starter deck.
It was a starter deck, yeah.
Yeah, and
but I mean, that's even that terminology doesn't make much sense now from the perspective that it's not really a playable deck that you get when you open it up.
Oh, absolutely not. No. So there's a limited resource that you need to collect and put in your decks to be viable, and that's like a kind of, they call it land. And you put them down on the ground, and there's like 5 different kinds of lands. There's swamps and forests and whatever. And in these starter packs, it wouldn't give you enough of these basic land to be able to make a functional deck. So it's supposed to start off someone's collection, but you can't really place something that is, reasonable with just that pack. So there was that, and there was booster packs, which were 15 cards in small little things. and that's how the collection started back in Ice Age, very early on in Magic's history. And since then, the game has become a huge moneymaker. They've had lots of online versions, and I think before I ducked out of the game, there were even talks about there was going to be like a movie or a TV series, or
Right.
who knows, whatever. But it's moved far away, I would say, from its very just strictly high fantasy origins to other realms. But that's what it was originally when I first got into it. And
Did you get anyone else in your high school into it, or was it just me and you playing? Because I don't think you knew many of my friends at my school, and you certainly weren't playing with us in at recess, basically. So you must have had some outlet that I was never a part of.
well, not at first. I mean, there were your cards, there were my cards. I got a friend of mine who didn't go to my school into the game as well, and talked about it with people I went to school with at my new school, and got a few of them into it, and found out some of them had some cards lying around. So I kind of inspired my own little sort of Magic the Gathering collection of people at my own school. I was kind of leading the charge on that. And then that kind of petered out after a couple of years. And I grew up, became an adult, got a job, made some money. And that's when I started to buy this stuff in pretty heavy quantities, because it was like my little kid brain was like, wow, oh my God, I can actually buy this stuff in huge amounts. And then it died out again, and then got back into it again, died out again. And I think now I'm at a point where I've had enough. It's not a matter of not having time to play it, or not having the interest. I've got like actual problems with the way the company has headed, and
Right.
I don't feel I've
Say that
changed.
thought. I'll prod you on. I'll prod you on that.
Sure, sure.
So at the end, so you had a good stretch in high school. I remember even at that time, you had like a lot of cards
Still
because
do, yeah.
you bought my couple of decks, or one deck, or whatever it is that I had, and I think I didn't last in Magic for more than 1 year. I don't think it was more than a year that I was in. So you were playing after I'd already stopped. And then it just died out, I imagine. I imagine there was like a really long period of time where you didn't touch it.
Well, I bought your cards,
Yeah.
and I was very into the collecting. And as people started to sort of ease off on their interest in the game, I was very excited to acquire the cards they'd been using to lay
Oh,
the beat
wow.
down on me. And I got to a point where this is a bit of a Vince McMahonism. I bought everyone else's cards and then had no competition, and just had a collection. And that was probably the first time I started, because I owned everybody's cards. Everybody stopped playing, and I
Right.
slowly acquired everyone else's shit.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like a massive downside to being in that position, is that every person you make a reasonable offer to is now no longer in your community, no longer
Yeah.
you can play with. And at that time, why were you doing that? I mean, as in, like, you really just loved the cards. You at that point you had converted from playing to a collector, or was it always collecting?
It was kind of Borg like. There was, I will assimilate this, I'll take this on board, and it will just help me against the remaining opposition.
Hmm.
And it got to the point where my remaining opposition was so thin that it was pointless. Yeah, so their resistance was futile, and me even bothering to play against them was futile at that point.
That's
So
funny.
yeah.
Yeah, so basically you did what you do with every game, and that is you seek the easiest way to get the most power and just demolish everything in front of you.
Yeah, but let's not mess around here. I mean, Magic the Gathering is not just a game where you show up with the cards you own. In recent years, when I've been playing
Mhm.
it, it was a limited format, and I went to a lot of these tournaments with my wife. She got into it as well. I recently,
Hmm.
well, in recent years, got her into playing, and we'd show up at these events in like collectible card game stores, geek stores, basically. And the way they worked is you didn't show up with your decks, you didn't show up with your collection. You showed up, you paid an entry fee, and they gave you a collection, a small handful of packs. And what you had to do is sit there, open the packs, build a deck just out of your packs, and
Oh,
then you
wow.
compete. Yeah, so a limited format, which is the sort of thing you kind of got to do in a game that's been around for decades, because anyone who was playing in 1993 is going to show up with cards worth tens of thousands of dollars and just obliterate the opposition. And this style of gameplay also means that people are buying the new product, the new expansion, in order to play, modern competitive stuff.
Wait, what do you mean? So at the start of the tournament, they describe that. Like, what are you paying? What are you paying for? The only thing you've clarified in my mind is you don't bring your cards.
That's right. You might bring some blinged out basic lands. I mentioned earlier on you need these lands to play the game. You'll show up with your own basic lands because one of the rules of these tournaments is you can have as many copies of basic lands that you want. But the cards that you actually play with, the ones that are doing damage against your opponents and whatnot, you don't know what you're going to get. You'll open these packs, you'll get a random assortment of cards, and you must build a 40 card deck out of that. So the
Wow.
old school rules you and I used to play with was, well, I don't know if we played by these, but you were supposed to have 60 card decks.
Mhm.
And in these limited tournaments where you can't access your whole collection, you just can access what you pay for, 40 card decks. So smaller, which makes it easier to build out of a smaller pool of cards. And there are different formats there as well. Some of them will be draft formats where everyone opens their pack of 15 cards, takes one and passes it on to the next person, which works in the sense that it allows multiple people sitting around a table to draft a particular archetype of deck. I'm going to grab this deck that does big damage. I'm going to grab this deck that does sneaky things, by noticing the cards that people are not picking up through the draft process. But the ones I typically played with my wife were just open the set, open the cards, build a set with a deck with what you got, and go from there. And what you pay for entry is really just the cost of the cards that you buy. In fact, you get it at a little bit of a discount, and what you win is more cards.
Interesting. Wow, that's both expensive and I don't know what to say. There's a lot of dynamics to that are a little iffy from a collector's perspective. For one, your collection doesn't matter at all. Number two, you keep the cards, but you cannot use them again anyway. So I'm not sure if that's like at that point, is it really just disposable?
Well, these events that I went to were called pre-release events.
Right.
So these events would be held like a week before these cards hit the shops to be sold. So the incentive is you get them a week early. But in addition to that, you get special pre-release versions of cards where there'll be like alternate art, or there'll be a special like date stamp on for the date of the event.
Okay.
So it satisfied collectors in that there were super rare things that you could only get through these pre-release events too.
Interesting. Okay, that's pretty complicated. Is there like a phase of trading that happens? Because I mean, if you open up packs of cards, you end up with just, for anyone not viewing, you end up with, there's like 5 different color magics in the game, and it's typically not useful to try and play with all 5 magic colors in your deck. So
Almost never, yeah.
with 40 cards, you're saying, I'd say you single or dual, like max, like triple would be craziness, I'm guessing.
Yeah, but there's no trading period. The decks are smaller, so when you get five or six booster packs, I'm forgetting now, they're 15 cards each. Keep in mind the deck that you're going to build of 40 cards is going to be 17, 18, 19, 20 cards land anyway. So You're looking at, you've got to find 24 cards roughly. That was my guide. About 24 cards out of the 6 booster packs you open, they're going to synergize well, which is easy to do when you're opening 6 copies of 15. So there's no trading, but there are formats where there's like 2-on-2 formats. There's one called Two-Headed Giant where you team up, you sign up with a teammate, and you both open the same number of packs and you build decks, and it's not a 1 versus 1 battle. It's you and your buddy versus somebody else, and you can trade your cards amongst your buddy for that. But that's probably the only sort of regularly played version where you can do that.
Cool. So that introduces us to a topic that I've been thinking about a lot, and that is, and it's there seems to be factions within the player base, and it has some relevancy to other collectibles as well. And that is, there's a certain group of people, and could be the same person, there's like, but it does seem to be that there's a little bit of a war between people who see these things as game pieces for a game that I want to play. And then there's the other mindset, which is that these are collectibles. And in reality, you couldn't have one without the other to some extent. And in other worlds, like for example, in collecting watches, I mean, the game piece sort of person where they're just looking for utility, that'd be like, well, does a watch tell the time? And then that would be the end of the value. So typically in between the two mindsets, the person who's looking at utility. If it's a watch, it tells the time. If it's a magic card, it does damage or does something special on a game that I actually play in a tournament. These two mindsets don't value the cards very highly, just generally speaking. They're not collectors. And then there's the collectors where it seems like sky's the limit for a card. It doesn't even matter if you can't even play the card anymore. What are your thoughts on that? And maybe the community is like, is there a war between game pieces versus collectible? Is one harm the other? I mean, you've been in both places.
Well, the company that makes the game has been very heavily pushing that online thing that you were describing earlier on. And there's no collectible value to that. It's digital shit that lives on your screen and it's gone. And, they're going to shut down the game at any point. You can't cash out and get physical copies of those things. It's just purely the gameplay side of things. And as far as the collectors go, there's no point collecting anything these days that is a new printing, because the company prints this stuff into oblivion. There's no value of this to this stuff. So the collectors collect super old stuff, the stuff that you and I played with back in the day, except a lot of the stuff that you and I played with, those actual cards, which I still have, don't have a whole lot of value because they got scratches and scrapes on the back of them from the asphalt that were played on the schoolyard ground.
Yeah, we never thought about it was full game. There was no collectors in my school. It was just full game piece mindset. And even at that time, there was a store, Minotaur. I don't know if that was the one, but there were stores that sold individual cards starting to pop up. And I remember and it was too far away from where I lived, so I've never entered such a store. But we had heard about some of these cards starting to be worth money. But our perspective is that at the time was that they were worth money because they were just exceptional game pieces. So that we were never at any point where we were conserving, like trying to protect the card. Now, we never tried to ruin them, right? We were never trying to be abusive to them or anything like that. But at the same time, I think the main reason you wouldn't be abusive to it is that it's basically cheating if you can spot your card in your deck. So that would be a good reason not to be, destroying your card.
And I didn't know the value of some of those cards or the value that they'd held today, but at the time they were still valuable to me in the sense that this is my pride and joy. This creature's like the biggest creature I own. I'm not going to stuff up that card. Give me a break. So yeah, and things that were out of my reach at that point, the super crazy cards, I would have had to shell out like $150 for like the best card back in the day. And these days you're talking over $150,000 for some versions of some of these cards, depending on their condition.
Yeah, and the depth is now pretty strong. It's not like there's just one card that's worth, six figures. Rares from the first deck, first series alpha. Like, what would be the cheapest rare off the top of your head?
Oh, very, very alpha? Cheap. It depends, because the reason some of these cards hold value is not just because they're old, but because when the game first started, it was very broken. There was a massive power imbalance between the best card and the worst rare card, and the ones that were really, really good, everybody wanted many, many copies of. So you can find some cards from those very, very early sets and pick them up reasonably cheaply. Depends on the card, and some of those cards fall into a category where the company will reprint. They do reprint. They print them all the time. So functionally speaking, if you're building a deck, you don't need the super old versions, but some they stopped printing very quickly into Magic's history and made a promise to their customers, to their collectors, that they would never print them again. And that's why they've managed to pick up so much steam with their value.
Right. So let's get into that. So one of the really interesting aspects is that these are game pieces, and in the early days they may have printed cards that are just like crazy, and they've never been matched since in their style with respect to what they do. For any layperson, let's just say, this isn't a good example because I don't think there is an example like that, but just say it's an extremely powerful monster. It's almost unkillable because its stamina is just too high, and it doesn't have a casting cost. The cost to put it in play just is unremarkable. So a mistake like that, can happen in the early days of constructing a game. And at no point are they going to say, this is no longer a real card. We effed up and then recall it. So that's not happened. But what you are saying is at some point they're not going to repeat that mistake. They're not going to print that again. And at some point, and this is actually unclear to me, why did they ended up creating this thing. I don't know if they call it that in the Magic Gathering, the company, Wizards of the Coast, if they call it that, but there's this promise from them to never reprint that card. But in a lot of ways, that has been violated over time, is my understanding.
Right. Yeah. So they won't physically reprint, versions of the card that are just like the original. But that online game that you're talking about, yeah, they'll play. They introduce formats all the time. You can play with these super powerful cards, and it's a way to sort of bring people into this online tournament. And they have reprinted these cards in ways that are different to the original printings. So Magic the Gathering, there's a card face that tells you everything about the card, and on the back there's a logo symbol. It's the same across all cards, and they've reprinted copies of these cards with different card backs, so that they're not like tournament legal, but people can still acquire them. So they have kind of reprinted them, but not in the same way, not in a way that is just like the original printing. So people can get them, but they're not quite exactly the same. So the originals still hold a lot of value.
Interesting. The reserved list, in my understanding, has been violated in a lot of different ways. Like as you talked about, for example, they may not reprint the exact card, especially in the exact format. That first deck looks slightly different to the rest. They may be. So more recently they did, was it the 30th anniversary? If I understand, like there's these, they basically reprinted a lot of the cards, including cards in the reserve list.
Yep.
But the main caveat is that they're quote unquote not
Tournament
legal for play.
Yeah. Yep.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense.
Well, they're sort of legal for play in the sense that these days people don't grab their cards out of a pack and slam them down the asphalt of their playground and play with them. Anyone who's playing with cards these days chucks them in plastic sleeves to protect them, and plastic sleeves that have like colored backings to them. So the back of the card is concealed anyway. So all you're seeing is the face of the card. And people's collections are so large after decades that one of the most popular sort of casual formats that people play these days is called Commander, where people grab. I mean, it's almost like almost any card is legal to use in this casual set. Actually, I call it Commander, but it used to be called EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, and that's what it used to be called. It was very popular among collectors because the rules were you can only have one copy of a particular card in your deck rather than 4 that you would have in the normal Magic. You had to have very large decks, not 40 cards, not 60 cards, but 100 cards. And it was a multiplayer format. It wasn't just 1v1. It was a big table of people. It picked up a lot of steam, this game, this variant. And EDH was its original name. And the company that makes Magic picked up on the success of this. And then they started to design Commander products. They rebranded this game Commander, and everyone calls it Commander. And they sell Commander decks. And some of these reprints are really done to appeal to the Commander players who just want these super crazy powerful cards they'll never get any other way to shove into their Commander decks. Because what people were doing previously was, they'd have in-house rules where they could just like print proxies. They can go online, download a copy of the card, print it, and jam it into their plastic sleeve, and they play with their friends like that. But Wizards of the Coast saw an opportunity to make some money, and that's what they started to do. Reprint these cards that people were proxying in a way that meant they made no money. Now they're making lots of money.
So that's something I wanted to get into. I didn't expect to talk about it today, but this concept of proxying, I do and don't understand that. Here's what I thought it meant on top of my head, and that is, I've got a Black Lotus, which is that 6-figure card that we talked about. I want to play with it, but I don't literally want to be shuffling, card face down,
Mm.
a Black Lotus, like, just like Black Lotus gone.
Mm.
Your bad day would be a magician at the table of sleight of hand, So,
Hmm.
and my concept was like, oh, I'm gonna effectively do this Joker. I have a Black Lotus, so I'm gonna play it, but that's what this card is. That's what I would understand a proxy to be. But it sounds like that's got nothing to do with what you just said.
Well, people print versions of the cards, and they kind of look roughly like the actual cards. I mean, they look a lot like them, but there's a very particular kind of feel and texture and firmness to a Magic card when you bend it that you can't very easily replicate. Don't get me wrong. I've spent money for. I sent some money to China, and they sent me some. I got a couple of Black Lotuses myself, actually, and they're pretty good approximations of the real thing.
Right.
Um, and with the way that people sleeve cards these days, a lot of people, especially cards like that, you double sleeve. There's a smaller inner sleeve
Right.
that you put it in, and then you put that in at the outer sleeve. And with multiple sleeves,
Yeah, you
it's
could
not.
play it for that point.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I'd still be worried about playing real deal ones, just from the perspective of, I'd never want something that valuable out of sight.
yeah. But where are you
And
going to play with the real deal ones? You're either going to be at a tournament where they only allow people playing those old school real deal cards, so other people to
right.
play against has this crazy power, or you're playing a casual format with your buddies and you're playing with a buddy who's going to rip you off and can take that Black Lotus. Probably not. Reassess your friends if that's the case. So yeah, it doesn't
That's
happen.
interesting. But so when you say proxy, is that the full word, or is that short for an approximation? Because I mean, by proxy, that, like, it's not proxying anything. As in, proxy to me means there is a real one. This is the stand-in or substitute, and then this is how we're going to play. What you're talking about is like, I know this card exists, so I'm just going to print one of those out.
Yep, and in the sphere they call those proxies. That's the etymology of the word approximation.
Yeah.
But the ones that Wizards of the Coast print, do people call them proxies? I don't know. Just substitute cards for the real ones. Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Because I'm a little bit into like crypto stuff, and I was thinking, if there was a service, so I already know this is a bunk, but in my mind, what I was thinking was that people were actually proxying real cards, as in they had to show real possession of the card. They just wouldn't literally play with it on the table. And with things like Ethereum and smart contracts, what you could do is you could send the card into like some keeper of, an organization, where they would say, okay, you've deposited your card, here's an Ethereum token back. And through a series of smart contracts, you could rent the card to other people and they could play around the world. But there's no more than the original amount of Black Lotuses ever actually in play around the world. So you get to a tournament or something like that, and that would be a suitable way to control that people are playing with real cards. You get to see these things in play, but it's a way to, how would we say, rent seek from collections, provide fundamental value back to a card that's so valuable you wouldn't realistically play with it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so proxies have, yeah, okay, so that clarified a lot up.
Really for casual play, yeah. Not they're not allowed in tournaments, and your play group that your buddies have will agree to it. Some of them will flip tables if they see some bullshit printing that you've put together, or got a small little scrap of Kleenex and you've drawn a picture of something. Like it's not going to fly in certain contexts. I can tell you now, if I was up against one of my friends back in the day and they pulled out some, like cut up piece of paper with the name of some super card that I then lost the game to as a result, yeah, it would be on like Donkey Kong. So
Right. Well, I mean, that just seems that seems so casual. It doesn't even seem like a real game, especially when you consider that every other card you had to pay for. The idea that there's cards in your deck that you didn't pay for, you just dreamt of owning but didn't actually purchase.
yeah, well, it'll warp the format, won't it? I mean, if someone can show up with proxies, but then everyone else knows they can start doing that too. It's kind of like when we were kids and we had this format warping rule where you could play all your lands all at once.
Right.
We just it became the normal. You got used to it. That's what play groups are doing with proxies in some cases, but some, of course, don't allow them. Yeah, it depends.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. In such a group, would it be common to just proxy everything they wanted? Like, I mean, is it an exception or is it the rule,
I had
basically?
one small casual group that I played with, and we would never have allowed it. Especially given that I was sort of like called a lot of the shots, and a lot of my strength was being able to draw on such a massive card database. So if I was allowing
Right,
others to put proxies together, it just negated the advantage I had over others. So no way.
right. And to me, that's just actually fakes. That's not
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
I don't really see any part of that isn't just basically fakes and then playing the fakes. But from a game piece, game player's perspective,
Hmm.
there was like it doesn't. It still matters that they're fakes, but not in the same way. Like if it's not the same perspective as like, oh, the market's flooded with fakes.
That's right.
Well,
Yeah.
from a game player's perspective, it's like, well, if it's flooded with that particular card and fakes, you could play with it too if you really wanted to, and that's not really
Hmm.
going to break the game, but it will
Hmm.
break the market.
Hmm. Hmm.
Interesting. How pervasive do you think proxy play is in casual groups? Like how often do you think that's done?
I don't know. I can only speak to my own group, but I know that a lot of people get the proxies to grab a deck, to build a deck with cards they don't own, and then play test it to see how it works. And then if it's going the way they want, they go online, they buy the actual real cards and put them into their real decks. So it's not just for the sake of the fun of the individual game, but it's to test things out, and
That
they're
makes
put
sense.
together.
Like to me, it sounds more akin to like practice rather than real play. As in, I want to see how this functions. Is this a fun way to play? What's
Hmm.
the makeup of it? So I get it, but it feels more like training slash practice than it does like real deal stuff. Like I can't imagine anyone would give up a card based on the outcome of a game played with proxies.
Hmm.
Now,
Oh,
now
that's
is
it. You're talking about an old rule that long gone. You're talking about ante. When Magic was
yes.
first introduced, there was a rule that said, you turn over the top card of your deck, and you and your opponent both put that card aside, and whoever wins gets to keep both cards. And that went out of the game very, very quickly. Because people were losing expensive cards. The stronger your deck, the more at risk you were to losing something important. But also because they were trying to market the game in countries around the world where gambling was strictly illegal, and it fell into the category of gambling. So that went away. It was one of the first things that disappeared from Magic. This whole ante-rule. There are still a few cards. Well, there are cards out there printed back in the day that do impact the ante, but they're not made
Oh
anymore.
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, they impact the ante.
Yeah, but now these things are
Wow.
useless because it's an abolished rule, has been for
Sure.
decades. Yeah.
But that's interesting. I had no idea. I forgot what the term was called. But yeah, I mean, even when we were playing as kids, we did play ante, but it would no way be a random selection of our cards. Like that's just it's there's no point. Like I don't know, maybe it'd be exciting, but that's a little bit more like gambling, as you said. Now, I don't think the fact that ante exists is like gambling, but the fact that the card that goes into ante is random, like if you played it like that, that would be gambling because very much so, like more so than poker, Magic is definitely a game of skill, right? Deck construction, how to play, there's so much skill involved. I doubt it would. I mean, because in America, poker gets by because it's judged as being a game of skill, but the deck's random. You're not even walking in with like building a deck. It's just your play.
Hmm.
But what we would do in my school, I don't know if we ever played ante together or something like that, was that we would select a card that we would select cards that we felt were equivalent. Like the easiest one would be just basic land.
I have no
Uh,
memories of ever playing ante, and
really?
I think I made one trade with somebody, a card for a card in my entire life, just because I was so paranoid about losing out on the value side of things, and it upset me for so long. Like it was like five. 10 years later. That one trade that I made, I ended up repurchasing as an individual that card that I traded out just to make sure my collection was exactly where it always should have been. So I had no memory of ever playing with Anti.
Oh, okay. That's funny. I think like so trading was a huge part of what we did in my school, and that was out of necessity to build a deck that wasn't just filled with a color you didn't want. So
Yeah.
we had to do it. We did do anti as well, which wasn't unlike any other game like, Pog. Like that was like quite a few years early. Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 years early actually. It wouldn't have been that far. Did you play Pog?
No, never got into Pog.
I really, that didn't happen. Tarzos and Slammers.
Nah.
Oh, okay. No, so yeah, I remember Pog, and Pog was all about whoever won took the pieces, the Pogs, I
Yeah.
guess. Yeah, there's Pogs and Pog Slammers. Back then, we were very concerned about the collectability. Actually, there was a game aspect to it, but the collectability aspect was very important because I remember using proxies when we were playing certain cards. Like if it was a particularly, so I would say, sought after piece, we wouldn't literally play with those two pieces.
You talk about the Pogs here? Or are
Yeah,
you talking about the Magic? Pogs.
no, Pogs.
All right.
Pogs.
Yeah.
Because, but in Magic, I don't remember ever really giving a shit about the cards, like to that extent. Like, yeah, we wouldn't be damaging them, and your best card you wouldn't be, allowing to be damaged, but you would play with it. You would play with it. While the Pogs, you wouldn't play with the best pieces. You would say, okay, let's just get two clean pieces of crap pieces. We'll play with that, and then whoever wins that gets the actual good pieces.
I never played it myself, but I understand part of the game was to take this big sort of plastic thing and slam it down on them. Like you're actually damaging by playing the game. So
Exactly.
yeah, proxies made sense.
Yeah, so you're literally damaging them by playing. Now, you don't have to, but you're not going to restrict each other from using the slammer in the way that they want. So the slammer is the piece that you would drop on the Pogs. Man, that never came back. Pog
I think it did very, very briefly. It never
with the
really sort of.
Tarzos.
Okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah, it did. Like I think 4 years later, it sort of came back with the Tarzos, but those were given away for free in chip packs. It wasn't.
Yeah, and they were plastic as opposed to more cardboardy, papery, right? So they were a bit more durable and yeah.
Yeah, everyone brought out their old school slammers again. So you left the game eventually, right? So you went into full collector mode, sort of as a matter of just trying to be the best gamer, and then you ended up with a huge collection. Then you had, I assume, more than one phase of re-entering, but most recently, currently, you're no longer in the game, quote unquote, right? Neither the game nor collecting is.
Yeah, that's right. For like the last year and a half, thereabouts, yeah.
So could you describe that? So you were playing, and then.
Well, yeah, I guess for me, to some extent, it was a social thing. The first time I stopped playing is because I bought people's collections around me, so there was no one to play with. Then I got back into it when I was in university. I was making a bit of money working as well, so I could buy some cool stuff and play with people. But then I graduated, had no one to play with again. Life came along, worked. I eventually moved overseas and sparked a good friendship with somebody who had played Magic in their youth, and we just decided to get back into it together. And we visited nerd stores and recruited some other nerds. And I look at that as my golden age of playing Magic, actually, because it was like every Tuesday night there'd be Magic night. Then I moved away from that country and stopped again. But then I forced my wife to get into it. She ended up enjoying it quite a bit. She's got a significant collection. And then it sort of petered out over time. And I am where I am now, where I'm not playing at all. I've got a massive collection. It's all very pristinely stored in plastic pockets and binders. It's all I've got thousands and thousands of cards. You could ask me to find any particular one. I could tell you exactly where it lives to find it.
Yeah, I gave you that test the other day. You pulled Infernal Denizen out in about 30 seconds. So when was the first time you bought a card, or the first time you bought a significant amount of cards purely on the basis that you thought it was an investment?
Oh, for an investment, never.
Okay. So you were just So why were you buying them?
Um, to have them, to satisfy the little kid in me that just wanted them,
Okay.
um, and to play with them. So I'm really not a Magic person, but I wouldn't consider still ever selling them. So it's never been an investment thing, and the collection is worth a significant amount compared to any other thing I collect. But I would never sell it. It's not for that purpose for me. Every card, despite where the game has gone these days, I got memories about with them, and I can always return to it one day. I've returned to the game like 3 times in the past. Who knows how things will go? But at the moment, the game and the company disgusts me and had enough, and other things have gotten in the way.
So that's really interesting. So every time you purchased, it was basically to facilitate more game playing. So you've got a collection, but it's only because you're the most hardcore game player.
Pretty much, yeah. So even when that golden age of Magic ended, and I wasn't playing with 3, 4 other guys every Tuesday night, I'd still maintain my decks and add to them and tweak them. And a new set would come out, and I want to grab a particular card that would improve my deck's potency by like 1%, and I'd pick it up, and my wife and I would build decks and play against each other. So I've still got decks that exist now that existed just like that, pre 2004. So these things exist and get tweaked when new cards come out that I think will fit into them. But I'm at a point now where the new things that'll come out, I'm not going to tweak them that much, and I'm just a bit tired of the whole thing.
Sure. Um, so why did you quit?
Most recently,
Yeah, your most recent.
um, well, because when I'm into something, I'm really into it, and I follow it across all platforms. There's that digital version of the game that you spoke about, which is where I would get a lot of competitive play, and my collection on there didn't match my collection in real life, so it felt like didn't feel great. I'd follow the goals and the aims of the company that make the cards, and they were doing things and saying things in ways they never used to. It used to be about making just the best game they could for their audience, and I felt as though that I'm really not their target audience anymore. It used to be nerds and losers and kids who are into spells and dragons and high fantasy stuff. And over the years, they've released different sets with different themes, and they're set in different locations. It's not just all high fantasy. They've had sets that are set in all sorts of weird and wacky places, sets that take from
Mhm.
Norse mythology, sets that take from Greek mythology, sets that take from like a Gothic Germanic horror theme,
Any movie
feudal
tie-ins yet?
Japan. Movie tie-ins, yeah, sort of. They've in recent years tied into all sorts of things. Growing up, in addition to loving Magic, I also loved other things like Street Fighter, for example. I was a massive Street Fighter fan as a kid,
Yes.
and they've released Street Fighter Magic cards. And despite loving both things, I don't really want them together. I don't want to
Right.
be showing up at my games with friends or whatever, and they're pulling out a Ryu with dials and all sort of
Right.
stuff. I
They're
think
sort of
there's
trying to turn Magic the Gathering into a platform rather than a prop. They're sort of devolving its own universe effectively.
I think they're trying to expand the reach, because Magic isn't just this sort of small thing anymore. They're trying to expand it out to people who like Street Fighter, who like Harry Potter, who like Warhammer 40k, who like um, Lord of the Rings. Then again, I would imagine a lot of Lord of the Rings people and Magic people. There was a lot of overlap there anyway.
Right.
So they've done a lot of that. It's not really the mainstream sets that have that. It's sort of supplemental sets that have that. But it bothers me those cards exist at all, because in these casual formats like EDH or Commander that have really taken over, the casual formats is like all I would play. So of course I'm going
Mhm.
to have to contend with these cards. Someone's going to bust out their Godzilla or their Dracula card, or like. So it wasn't really for
They
me.
could bust out Godzilla. I like that.
I've got both of those. I got a Dracula, I got a Godzilla. Yeah, that's right.
Dracula.
So yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't like it that it wasn't purely its own thing. It
Hmm.
felt a bit opportunistic. It felt like some bullshit business practices that don't really. I don't know. I can't really blame them just for that, because I didn't have to buy those cards. But it felt as though that as someone who was moving away from playing to just collecting, it was now impossible to collect cards, back in the day, that Infernal Denizen you mentioned earlier, there was one version of that card. These days, for some of those the cards, there's like 10 different versions. There's an alternate art, there's an alternate frame, there's a full art version, there's a foil version, there's a full
Oh,
art
yuck.
foil
I hate that
version.
kind of thing.
There's yeah, it's ridiculous. So like back in the day, I'd be really excited if I was going to build a deck. I had 4 copies of a card, I'd chuck them all in there. Nowadays, if I was to do that and I was lucky enough to get 4 copies of a rare card or a mythic rare, they would all look completely different. So it became impossible for collectors. They're doing a lot of appealing to whales. And
Mm,
don't get me wrong, it's not just the impossibility of the collecting that irked me, the frequency of releases, the crossovers to strange things. It's also the political sort of messaging of the company and their social sort of stances on various things, which bug me too.
right. I don't want to go too deep into the political stuff, but the last time I really talked to you about Magic was when they banned a certain set of cards. But what they did at the time, it was a little bit weird, but they said that they would promise to go through it properly, go through the compendium of all cards ever printed, and make sure they're all banned. And I did some follow up to that, and basically, I felt that they put themselves in just a horrifyingly bad position because they didn't just say like they opened up a can of worms with respect to, okay, these cards are now, here's the bar for where we think a card isn't socially sensitive enough, and we're going to ban these cards, but we haven't done a proper review. So there's probably other cards that will be banned, and they promised to do a review of all the cards and then ban more cards, is what they were saying at the time. And I picked up a few of the cards on the sidelines that looked obviously like beyond the barrier of that same line. And as far as I can tell, they've not added to the banned list in that way, but there have been some cards that they've declined to reprint, is my understanding.
Yeah, and when we say banned, a lot of these cards are old cards that they weren't really going to reprint anyway. So when we say
Right.
banned, they've like basically scrubbed them from history. If you go to their online database and you search for these cards, they just don't exist there anymore. They've gotten rid of them. And some of the ones they've gotten rid of, they've got to make the Magic cards of today, reflect the modern world and suit modern audiences. You're not reprinting these old cards anyway. And some of them are
Right.
very, very strange decisions. This was a political stance that they were making, a social stance, more than it was about needing to make sure these cards were eradicated. I would say more eyeballs were on these cards than ever were before because of the actions that they took to wipe them from history. I don't think you would have acquired these cards had they not gone through this process. So what are they doing? This is what I mean. This is a marketing tactic that's disgusting, like those other things I mentioned. This
Yeah.
isn't a game I love anymore. This is just a machine to make certain people money. And I mean, I can speak about some of those banned cards because some of them really raise some eyebrows. But I don't know if you want to get
Some of
into
them
that.
didn't, like cleanse. That's just a color parallel. Like there's a black card that does the same thing, and so forth. So some of them just seemed like very eyebrow raising. Some you had to like really dig deep. It's like, is that really the common meaning? Because I'm not sure most people really thought of that. So there's probably only one card that was particularly eyebrow raising. But at the same time, I'd struggle to imagine anyone took offense at any of these cards at any point in time. No one's looking at these things with that lens unless you're, there's some people out there that are like that, but they're not truly offended, as in they're not the target of offense, but their entire life is based around the idea that they will take offense on behalf of everybody else.
Hmm.
So yeah, completely understandable in the modern world, but as a collectible, it's sort of it's funny stuff. One thing I noticed in a lot of commentary that's more common, that's very recent, is everyone refers to the management of this game as Hasbro.
Yeah,
And
Hasbro acquired Wizards of the Coast, so
but that was
Wizards
a
of the Coast is
very
now.
long time ago. As soon as
Mm,
they acquired, were people referring to Hasbro? Because I've seen this other thing before where like a certain developer is owned by a publisher and everyone just starts blaming the publisher for everything that the developer does or doesn't do.
mhm.
And it's, to me, it's like a tonal shift. Maybe the blame does lie with the owning property, but that shift where people are going to start saying, instead of Wizards of the Coast, I'm going to call it Hasbro. That shift typically happens only once people start getting angry with what's happening. They just
Mm.
start using Hasbro because it sounds more corporate, sounds more disconnected, and that's what the player base are feeling. What, when the acquisition happened, did players immediately start calling it Hasbro, or
No,
was
no.
there a time
Hasbro picked
point?
this up because it was they liked what they saw. I think they just let it run as it was. But yeah, as a fan of the game for a long time, I think I noticed in recent years that people were saying that Hasbro had more of an active hand in what Wizards of the Coast was doing. I don't know if that's true or not. I assume there is some truth to that, but I don't know the internal workings of the company. And at the end of the day, I don't give a shit if it's Hasbro's fault.
Right.
Wizards of the Coast is still pumping out the shit, so who cares whose fault it is? It's not something I'm interested in. I'm not going to say, oh,
Sure.
it's Hasbro's fault. I'm going to keep buying this stuff.
Well, I don't mean to say let's assign blame correctly. What I'm trying to figure out is if a large portion of the base starts calling it, something else, they have beef basically with the company at that point. When do you feel that, it's purely subjective? Obviously, you don't have a survey. When do you feel that people started referring to the management of the game as Hasbro?
I think people still say Wizards more than they say Hasbro, but
Okay.
people know beneath that Hasbro sort of owns them. So it wasn't that long ago that I unsubscribed from all the various YouTube Magic people that I followed. Everyone always said Wizards. No one ever said Hasbro this, Hasbro that. It was always Wizards of the Coast.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
it's not just a Hasbro thing in the sense that some of the people I was following most closely online who work at the company and have been like official messengers of the company for decades. There's a guy called
Mm.
Mark Rosewater. He was working for Wizards of the Coast when you and I were playing as kids, and still
Right.
is.
Wow.
And some of his messaging online that has irked me as well. So it's not just a Hasbro thing. These are people who've been there forever
Sure.
who are leading the charge of, massive retardation and taking the game from a game to other things in various ways.
Interesting. Yeah. I actually, because Wizards of the Coast, they're over in Renton in Washington State. I actually know someone who used to work for Wizards. Um, kind of interesting. I mean, it's a small building just
Hmm.
off the freeway,
Hmm.
and not a particularly fancy part of town. It's classic suburbia Nerdsville, I guess.
Hmm.
Nothing else to do. Let's do D&D type stuff. So really, yeah, really interesting. Um, just
You
looking through.
mentioned earlier that you don't really want to get too deep into the sort of social stuff or the political stuff with Magic. Why is that?
I think that it's sort of going deep on it. So I'm at the moment, this channel is more about, how do you say, collecting
Okay.
and at the meta level.
Hmm.
And I think that it's enough to show that they're injecting like politically divisive stuff and how that can ruin the market of collectability for that stuff.
Hmm.
So, Bud Light's not issuing collectible beers, but they've certainly harmed their brand. But with something that is truly collectible, you could permanently harm your brand. Now,
Mm.
you're interesting in that you feel disillusioned, but you won't sell your cards that you have. But I think what I've been seeing online and on YouTube is there's evidence that whales have exited. Like
Right.
a decent number of whales have exited. People who have obviously loved the game enough to build entire collections have said, you know what, I'm going to sell my entire collection. And there's lots of examples of entire collections being sold. And I don't, like, people enter and exit the game all the time. But if we're talking about, they have like 3 complete sets of alpha or something like that, that's a little bit more significant than, Johnny down the street, his like 16 packs or something like that is, he's decided to toss in the towel.
Hmm.
So I do think a lot of the things that the management have done with respect to reprinting, introducing properties that aren't really Magic the Gathering, injecting Transformers and all these other properties that you mentioned as well, like Street Fighter. This does it. This will please some people, but it will also potentially disillusion other people, and ultimately missteps will cost the company as well as collectors. But the company doesn't give a shit about collectors,
Mm.
so they'll do anything that moves them up for a quarter or something like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's very interesting because in a lot of other collectible spaces, you have to think about whether or not the company cares about the collectible market and if that's in it for you, whether there's any evidence that they're potentially screwing things up. And I see a lot about current Magic the Gathering that seems like a dumpster fire if you're a collector. Like it just doesn't seem to make much sense.
If you're collecting new stuff, yeah. The old stuff that I've got was before this game went off the rails, so that's why I don't feel compelled to sell. They're not going to release new crap that's going to soil what I already own. I'm just going to not
Yeah,
get the new stuff that they put out there.
right. Um, what do you feel about other collectible card games? Because as you described, like Magic Gathering is probably like the first one. I don't know if that's true, but I don't have anything to refute that. To me, it feels like the OG, so I call it the OG. I think that's what you're basically saying. What do you feel like about Pokemon?
Well, I just googled first TCG, and the first hit is Magic the Gathering. The first collectible card game created was Magic the Gathering, invented by Richard
Really
Garfield, patented by Wizards of the Coast, 1993. I always thought it was the
amazing.
first, so I never challenged myself to have to look that up. It's just always true to me. So, but it turns out a quick Google tells me yes.
Well, I talked to someone else, and we're not. I wasn't really sure. I definitely wasn't sure at the time when I was playing Magic in school how old Magic actually was. If you asked me at the
Right.
time, I would have thought it was the first TCG because at the time I thought the game basically existed in time immemorial.
Mm,
Basically, was my understanding that I was only just being introduced to a game that has already existed for a long time. And
mm.
so I didn't realize at the time that we were talking about the second year of its existence, I think, or first or second year of
Yeah, it
its
was roughly 2 years
existence.
old when we were playing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if the versions of the game prior to Ice Age that we played even came to Australia. Like I don't even know if we ever had the opportunity. I don't know if we.
Yeah. I
I
mean, I've
mean,
picked up some of those cards since, but I don't know if it was because they were collected elsewhere then brought over. But I've got older stuff since. Yeah.
so you don't know when it came to Australia? Because
No,
I
but I've
definitely
often
don't.
I've often wondered if Alpha, the first sets definitely weren't here. The first sets were printed in the States and ran out so quickly that they didn't even escape that corner of the States, really. As far as I'm aware, I don't know. But it was just a massive, unexpected success. So those early sets wouldn't have been in Australia. I imagine if they were such low quantities, you could safely say that it counts as though they weren't in Australia.
Yeah, I'd say that seems pretty true. It's crazy that I think we were introduced to it at the time that we did, because I don't think it was just a wide craze in Australia, like say Pog or something like that was more highly distributed. So I don't know. I guess we were nerds. It was always going to happen.
Mm. Hmm.
So how do you feel about Pokemon and say Yu-Gi-Oh, any other TCG that isn't the OG?
Did you say Yu-Gi-Oh? I'm sure it's Yu-Gi-Oh, right?
No, okay, yeah, sorry, I mispronounced it.
That's okay. I think I might be out nerding you, and I know this stuff because I work in a high school, and I've still got loser kids I teach who are into that stuff today. Um, how do I feel about it? Whatever. I think when I was originally into Magic, I was very sort of territorial about it, or rather, I was rooting for my team because if I allowed any of my friends to get too deep into this other stuff, all the investments I'd made in my collection would have been useless. I had to, change gears and do something else.
Right.
Um, and yeah, I just defended what I knew and loved, and everything else was some bullshit, copy paste crap. And I loathed Pokemon as a kid.
Yeah,
It was
this is
just a big
bullshit. This will
popular
never
thing,
last.
and
This is dumb.
yeah.
This is for babies.
How do I feel about it now? I don't know. I don't know. Look, I can't. Some of the people that I followed on YouTube who were serious collectors of Magic the Gathering, there's this guy called Rudy who does this channel called Alpha Investments, and he doesn't just collect Magic cards; he collects other cards as well, including like Pokemon. And when I say collect, I think he buys them in massive quantities and sells them on and hangs on to some older stuff for himself. And I still don't care about Pokemon, but I can see that there might be some appeal to it in the sense that they're not going to release special edition Black Lives Matter versions of Pokemon cards, you'd imagine, like they have for Magic the Gathering.
Completely unironically, Nintendo is way more based than
Right.
full on Dungeons and Dragons type stuff. Apparently,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So in Magic the Gathering, there'll be something set in some sort of medieval world, and there'll be a trans character who's conquering all. I don't know if we're ever going to see Transitu. I summon you, or whatever they say in Pokemon. Yeah, like
well, I mean, maybe that crowd already won in the world of Pokemon because I mean they're all gender neutral, I guess, as as best as I could tell.
I think the difference is that Pokemon is. I mean, sure, there are adults who are into it, but it's always going to have that appeal to kids. And Magic the Gathering has moved from those kids who are, very, very early high school into people who've grown up and gotten jobs who can buy tons of this stuff, and they're now more politically minded. And so maybe they're trying to appeal to that. I don't know. But the changes that I've seen in Magic, I can't imagine ever happening in Pokemon. And when I say I can't imagine it, I've got some finger on the pulse of Pokemon, not necessarily in terms of the cards, but because of 2016 Pokemon Go. Like many people around the world, I installed that on my phone. My wife played for a long period of time, and that stuff just doesn't exist in that franchise.
Yeah, yeah. And I watched the Mario movie. Did you take a look at that?
I saw a review of it, didn't see it. In the same way that I was very sort of loyal to Magic the Gathering as a kid, I was also very loyal to Sega, or Sega, as I was taunted into calling it once I moved to Canada for a while.
Right.
So
I
Mario was always Satan to me. It was always the devil. I was a Sonic person. So there are remnants
I
of that
agree.
still.
I still have the same I lean the same way, and I'm always very skeptical of anything that Nintendo is doing is strong. Sega Master System forever, guys. It's the master of all systems. But yeah, at least it was good. I went to see it primarily because my son's never been to a theater before, a cinema, and he's of the age that he could probably do it. And I really wanted to see a movie in a Dolby theater, and there's only one in Las Vegas, because I was just dying to see a theater that would wreck my home theater, basically. Like my current home theater is completely insane, and my son has been completely spoiled by having very theater-like proportions and sound. It's just like I grew up with complete dog crap, home video level type stuff. I was grateful to have like a 66 centimeter TV with its inbuilt speakers, and we had VHS, and then eventually DVD and slightly better flat panels, but certainly nothing of theater scale. But the Sega movies were very good, I found. I thought they kicked butt, and I think the Sega movies are slightly better than the Super Mario.
There you go.
So Disney's coming out with a TCG called Lorcana. I think it's being released later this year. Have you heard anything at all about it?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to sort of like read up on it, but I have very little patience for anything that isn't Magic the Gathering for the same
Mm.
reasons that have always existed for us.
So many TCGs have come and gone since Magic started, and they're buried. They're in the dust. I
Mhm.
would never. I've had enough of Magic, the OG. I'm not going to pay any attention or spend any resources on something that's not necessarily going to stand the test of time, or who am I going to play with? And Disney's got its own issues.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Cool. Was there anything else that you collected? Because I'm not. Because it's kind of funny. You are the one person in my life who collected like just a lot in terms of magic for sure. Like no one
Mhm.
collected anything at all that compares to the amount of magic cards that you acquired. And but the only other thing that I can point to that I recall with respect to collecting, and I'm not sure if you would call it collecting, but it feels similar to me. And you were very, very proud of your Sierra Games compendiums.
Was I?
Like, as in, I remember you had a book writing down effectively a modern FAQ, but it was all in pencil and paper
Oh,
about
that I made myself. Yeah, yeah.
like King's Quest series.
Sure, sure. Close. It was Quest for Glory, which was originally called
Quest for
Heroes
Glory,
Quest
yes.
before they got into some legal trouble with some group that had a board game that was called Heroes Quest. They had to change the name to Quest for Glory pretty quickly. But yeah, I got into that. Um, that was, wouldn't call that a collection, though. I mean, there are countless, thousands and thousands of people who have all of those games from those series.
Right, relatively easy collection to get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Would you say you collect anything else?
Yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know how well this is going to work, but if I can move the webcam, I can show you some other stuff I've been building on for a while. I was into comics quite a bit as a kid, and in recent times, since getting a bit of money, or rather becoming adult, getting a job, I've started to pick up um, some X-Men action
Wow.
figures. These are specifically 90s X-Men action figures. So I've got many from this old Toy Biz series. And don't mind that. That's just a picture of Ardenfell from Morrowind. And I'm still adding to this collection. So it's still going good. But I've got
Wow.
most of them that have this particular card back to them. So one day I'm going to have kids, I'm sure, who are going to bust them open. I'll come home from work and then have to kick some ass.
Yeah, so I do remember you always loved X-Men. You had this absolutely awesome, I don't know, painting or printing, but it was on some pretty solid framing if I
Yeah, it's back
recall.
there.
Woo! So OG X-Men. Um, that's really interesting because comic collectability has always been a thing, even when we were looking at comics when we were a kid. But even when we were a kid, we knew it was kind of futile because if I recall correctly, the comics we would get in Australia were reprints anyway, and we would just not really get proper distribution. So wasn't really a thing. Like you could love the comics, but you weren't really going to be able to collect them.
Yeah, I didn't read the originals. I got into, I mean, the X Men that I really loved. Those stories were printed well before I was born, and I'd buy these books that had them collected in like big, large sort of episode after episode issue together. So that was enjoying the sort of the franchise, but not really necessarily collecting. Whereas they're never going to release some compendium that's going to have these action figures that was specifically only ever released in the 90s, in their packaging. So
Right.
yeah, it's different.
That must be very hard to get in Australia.
Yeah, yeah. So shipped from overseas typically, and interestingly, this set has actually the first ever action figures of certain characters who were not popular at the time. No one bought them, but these days, for example, Deadpool. I'm sure you've heard of Deadpool. Deadpool, the Deadpool action figure I've got, pristine condition, first Deadpool action figure ever made. So it's got some real value to it. And he was a nothing at the time, and now it's very, very highly sought after. And the 90s X-Men in particular hits people of my generation really in the fields, because those are the X-Men they grew up with the animated series. In fact, I think Disney Plus is bringing out some new X-Men show that actually features the X-Men from that specific time period as well. It's not the X-Men people know from the movies. It's that specific 90s animated series collection of X-Men.
Interesting. I hope they
but of
don't
course,
screw it up for you.
no, they will. They will. That franchise has got its own problems too. In fact, that my disinterest in the storylines that they started to put out there, it was mirrored by what happened in Magic the Gathering. I just lost interest. Too many new creators wanting to put their own slant on certain things, taking it away from its roots. And maybe it's just me growing up. I don't know. I say that, but I don't believe it. No, I specifically do notice social and political angles creeping into everything in ways they never used to. And it's not limited to the things I collect or the media I consume. It's, also relevant in the workplace. My school is more political, the individuals there. And a lot of this has to do with, I think, just the polarization of the sort of media that people consume. So people feel, anyway, that's a whole other topic.
I think the right way to put it is that it's war. Basically, it's war, and the battlefield is everything.
Right.
And so it's no longer this concept of war being on a battlefield, an extension of politics. Politics is actually just one dimension in which that war is being fought. And so the real physical war, like that happening in Ukraine or otherwise, that is not an extension of the politics. It just happens to be one of the battlefields in which an ideological war is being played out. And so literally everything now has a slant. But I don't think the slant is actually left versus right, even though it purports itself to be. And I don't think the players engaging in the war know what they're fighting for on any of the dimensions.
Well, when you say fighting for, it's not even a matter of people, actually really like. I'll give you a quick story from my workplace. There's a group of girls that I work with at my school who are now in year 12, the last year of their high school journey. And I remember teaching them back when they were in year 7, the first year of their high school journey, based on the way the Australian school system is set up. And they were inseparable, the best of friends as year 7 girls. And now they can't stand each other and don't talk to each other as year 12s. And you know why? Because somewhere in their high school journey, one of them was Team Biden and the other one was Team Trump, and now it's over. Can you believe this? This is people engaged in politics in a foreign country. That's just, what is going on? This is unthinkable. I can't imagine grudges like this existing back when I was a kid, based on United States contenders for president in a foreign country. It is bizarre. It is bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, even so, I was guilty of, say, being very political in high school. Okay, so I had, I don't know if you remember, but I was very political, but I was just a kid, right? As in, I didn't know the dimensions that made the most sense to most people in terms of left versus right, Democrats versus Republicans, liberal versus Labor. I remember one of my friends who is very political, asked me, who do I favor more, Republicans or Democrats? And I said Democrats, only because I thought that meant democracy. But but that's how uninformed I was of like 15 years old sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But what strikes me as very, very weird about young kids these days is I shared a prank, basically, a YouTube prank, and to my group. And it was just a guy doing a prank where he was just vaping obnoxiously in a college lecture. And I just thought it was funny. Like, he's pissing off the lecturer like really hard. But what shocked me was like all the kids are like really turning on him. They're like, get out of here, stuff like that. They were more triggered than the lecturer. It would have been
Yeah.
just so easy to ignore him. I mean, it's literally just vaping, you know what I mean? Like it's completely ignorable. But you had these like 19-year-old Karens, get out of here, we don't know. Just completely devoid of any amusement or fun, you
Hmm.
know?
Mm.
Well, do you think that's it's representative? Like they're just young people. They're just way too serious for their own good.
Yeah, yeah. I think they are, because they're being targeted by media and social media and the ads they find on there in ways they never were previously. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, I had to sort of use my home phone line to dial into the dial-up internet, and someone else in my phone would pick up the phone, it would cut me off. But these days, these kids are inseparable from their phones. You know, there are rules at my school about how they can use them and stuff, and they're linked in to being fed what essentially boils down to marketing, that plays on every sort of psychological trick we've learned about the human brain, and it's creating very, very different beasts. Um, yeah.
Cool. All right. It looks like we've just touched upon a few topics that we should cover another day. I just want to give you like the last opportunity to say anything you wanted to do, and then we'll sign off.
You know how when I'm sure we've gone through this both a couple times in our lives. You know, you're in a relationship with someone, and it doesn't go well, and you just want to see them die. You want to see them catch fire and be buried, perhaps decapitated. And I feel that way about the love that I once had for this particular collectible. With the route that
Hmm.
it's taken, I will celebrate and dance on the grave of Magic the Gathering. I'll never sell my cards. I'll keep my little time capsule of collections, and I'll teach kids one day how to play. And but I'd be very happy if they did go broke and completely fail. That would bring me a lot of joy. So I hope that does happen. Fingers crossed. I hope to see them punished.
The annihilation. We all want a
Absolutely.
fiasco. We all beg for it. All right. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, everyone. Comments, questions down below. And until next time, see you around.